Good evening, everyone. Merry Christmas to you all, and if you do not celebrate Christmas, then a happy December 25th. And without further ado, since this is Wednesday, and since Wednesdays usually my videos follow with a book review, I thought that I would discuss A Christmas Carol. Yeah, usually people really discuss the adaptations a lot. In particular, the films and the short films that have been made about it. And not a lot of people seem to discuss the original book, which is actually a novella, and it's rather short. It's only like 5 chapters, I think a total of maybe 80 pages, depending on, again, what version of the short story you get. Because usually people divide pages differently when you have a printed version of the book. But it is fairly short, and it's and it still jam-packs a lot of in-depth scenarios for a short story. And it seems to hit a chord for a lot of people, in particular within our current media, and how there have been so many adaptations of A Christmas Carol. So many looks into this story. And I kind of wanted to explore the original work and kind of see what it has to offer and sort of give you a sense of why this particular story inspired so many adaptations. Now, the interesting thing that you have to understand in regards to A Christmas Carol is that it was written by Charles Dickens, probably one of the most well-known writers of his day. And the interesting thing about this story is that it's similar to Dickens' works, but it takes itself in a different approach. Usually, at least from the Dickens novels that I've come across, they seem to address the topics in a fairly realistic manner. I don't feel like that it's sort of sugar-coated with this sense of fantasy. It seems like a lot of his works do focus on real issues, in particular more political or socio-economical issues, and this is all present in this kind of a story. More socio-economical rather than political, I guess you could say. But he really touches in on realism, and he doesn't seem to really go with this kind of fantasy and dreamlike scenario where a character goes through some kind of intervention, I guess you could say, that is kind of puts itself in a unrealistic scenario, whereas a lot of his other works, I think, are fairly drenched in details and trying to be as true to the certain things that he's talking about. And with The Christmas Carol, it sort of has those kinds of issues that Dickens wants to talk about, but in a different way, by incorporating this idea of having spirits and going through a kind of a journey. And you could argue that this book, or this short story, kind of emphasizes sort of a spirituality that Scrooge goes through, and or a spiritual journey, and I think it presents itself in a fairly unique way compared to a lot of his other works. So I found that to be really interesting. If you just look at the background of what he's made, like A Tale of Two Cities and Oliver Twist, you can kind of see that that he's not really a person that's focused in on fantasy. So I thought that aspect was really interesting. But in case you don't know what A Christmas Carol is about, it's basically about this really grumpy old man named Scrooge, Ebenezer Scrooge to be exact, and he does not like Christmas. He does not like leisure. He's a man that is strictly business, strictly work, strictly money. He's kind of the person that walks in the room and sucks out all the joy for everybody. He's supposed to be that kind of a character, especially in the beginning, obviously, until he goes through this spiritual journey. And yeah, it's kind of funny, and sort of tragic at the same time when you look at how he sort of has a sort of, not necessarily a tragic childhood, but still a challenging one. And it's originally he wasn't so self-indulgent, and he wasn't really born that way. He just sort of became that way and chose to be this way. So you sort of see that as he goes through his spiritual journey. And basically his spiritual journey involves 3 spirits, including his partner, who ends up dying, and he doesn't show up until 7 years after he's dead to tell Scrooge, hey, I'm a ghost, and you're gonna see 3 spirits. And the funny thing is, they call them spirits. And the interesting thing is unlike there being sort of this Christian-like emphasis of there being like a heaven or a hell, Jacob Marley brings this kind of afterlife into a different perspective, and he just sort of says, you know, I don't want you to become like me. And Scrooge is like, well, like, what does that ultimately mean? And Marley's kind of goes, well, it means that you're gonna roam this earth, and you're gonna wear chains, and you're going to carry all of the I guess sins or bad things that you've done with you throughout the rest of time, and you're just gonna be roaming on this earth, and you have really no control of what happens to you, and you're just kind of lost forever, and you don't really go anywhere. You just kind of are carried, and you can't break free. You're basically in a prison, I think, is sort of like what Jacob Marley was sort of getting at. And you can probably gather from the fact that he's wearing chains that that's sort of an emphasis on being in a prison. You're locked up, you're sort of doomed. But it's interesting because it's not a hell. It's not like he's really being tortured physically. He's sort of being tortured kind of just psychologically. Jacob Marley, he's sort of just living his guilt. That's kind of the torture that he wants Scrooge to not end up suffering from. So it's a really different take on what usually people think when we think of these kinds of Christmas stories, or think of a sort of a Christian traditional story, and that it doesn't feel like a Christian traditional story. It feels a lot like a fairly spiritual kind of a journey, and I think that's why it kind of relates to a lot of people who maybe don't even celebrate Christmas. It's just the fact that it doesn't try to kind of associate itself with a religion, even though it has this kind of Christmas spirit and undertone to it. It doesn't revolve around the Bible or anything. It's just it just revolves around this kind of spiritual journey, and I found it interesting that this story was addressing it on a more psychological level and emphasizing this kind of punishment as psychological. and the fact that they say that they're like three spirits, and it does seem Scrooge is having an intervention of some sort, but it doesn't seem like it caters to a particular religious doctrine. At least that's how I felt like reading this story. So it's very open in that sense, and I think that's why a lot of people sort of get behind that idea, because a lot of people sort of associate with ghosts and with people that have passed on as somehow living, and this is sort of, I think, an interesting take, and I found that to be really refreshing. So basically you have Jacob Marley, who sort of intervenes early on within the story, and he sort of tells Scrooge, heck, this is what's going to happen to you if you don't change. And basically he's visited by three spirits, past, present, and future. And the story basically explains itself there. The interesting thing is how it touches in on people that were in Scrooge's life as well as are still part of Scrooge's life. And it's odd because it really shows you the sort of opposite side of It's a Wonderful Life, like I kind of mentioned previously in my first ever video that I've uploaded recently on Monday, because really people do not like Scrooge. People are, I mean, I think there is this sympathy for that the nephew has for him, because he is kind of his blood, but everyone else seems kind of like, yeah, we would be better off without him. They don't really come out and say that, but they really do emphasize of, how, just how much of a how much of a grump he is, how much of a like a Debbie Downer sort of, they really don't seem to offer anything positive to say about this guy. And it's kind of sad, because it seems like throughout the majority of his life, he chose to kind of live this way, and on one hand, you almost want to say, well, there's maybe some reasons, like within his childhood, and sort of talks about in the beginning, like how he was lonely, and then how his sister passed away, and how that could have had some kind of effect on him. But really, it seems like a lot of people just don't understand him and don't really appreciate him, and it's kind of uncomfortable, I think, for people to just hear people just saying how awful of a person you are, and I think it hits Scrooge, but it doesn't hit him as hard until the third spirit comes. At least that's what I felt when I was reading it. I didn't feel like he reached his breaking point until like the way end. So I guess what I can say overall is that there is dimension to the character Scrooge, but again, it's really tight because it's not really a condensed, fully fleshed out story, unlike a lot of other of Dickens' works. So you don't really get a huge, gigantic, really in-depth character, but you do get a sense of a little bit of maybe why he would end up this way. But ultimately the book sort of displays, Scrooge's behavior as being very black, and what he ends up becoming to be the good and wholesome, and what we should strive for, and what we should pursue as being a good, and trying to be a good person, basically. So I think the other thing that has to come to mind when discussing this short story deals with whether or not it's kid-friendly, because there's been more childlike adaptations and there's been a lot of darker adaptations, and people might be wondering even if the book is recommendable for kids. And I think it is. It just depends on what your child, I guess, can handle. I would say that there are a lot more darker tones in this story than there are like lighthearted moments. I mean, Scrooge is funny. They do try to make, Dickens tries to paint him as like, as somebody who takes life so seriously, but at the same time kind of laughs at what's going on, or just kind of doesn't really laugh, but sort of makes people laugh because of what he has to say. And it's really not, I think, a fairly lighthearted story. It's really supposed to be like these really black and white kind of forces, and I don't really think it's trying to be something more than that, because it is really a short story. It's condensed that way. So it seems like I guess from a moral perspective, I think it's really good for children. It might be hard for them to handle because, again, Dickens is touching on these fairly depressing issues, and then you have the character of Tiny Tim who you know is very ill and is a child character, and there's not a lot of kid characters that are really focused on. So it's really hard for me to say whether or not kids can find something enjoyable about the original source material, but I think they can get a sense, they can get like an emotional response. I would say it's kind of like Fantasia. If your child was okay with watching Fantasia, then I think your child would be okay with reading this story, if you want to ever read this to your children around Christmas time. It's not completely inappropriate. It's just kind of dark and a little scary at times, but I don't think it's I don't think it's so bleak. And again, it kind of has that happily ever after kind of ending. So I think it still can resonate with kids. It just depends on what your child is willing to handle, I guess. And if your child can fully grasp what's going on, because again, I think reading them a story is different than having them watch a movie. So I'll just leave that up for my audience to decide. And if you don't have children or are not a child of yourself, then either way I would suggest reading the original source material, because it really is the foundation of all the other adaptations. So I'll try to see if I can provide a link, because I did manage to find the source material online, so that's how I managed to go and read through it. I guess the last thing I wanted to address is sort of this kind of legacy that this story has, in that not only do we see a lot of adaptations that are that are based off of the source material, but we get a lot of other works that are not originally based upon the source material, but sort of draw inspiration from the source material. If you look at It's a Wonderful Life, you'll see that there's sort of these similar elements in there. If you look at How the Grinch Stole Christmas, you can just go, wow, I see the connections here. Like this all leads back to this kind of concept that Dickens brought up. And it's kind of funny, but it's sort of true. These works kind of revolve around this idea of what Christmas means, and really do capture a lot of what Dickens was sort of just trying to say in his book. Also, there's been argument as to whether or not the the Scrooge in the beginning kind of has a point. Again, the Dickens was a little bit of he was fairly sympathetic to the poor, which is actually rather interesting because he paints them sort of in a grayish area in Oliver Twist, but in this this adaptation, or this particular work, he makes the poor seem like that they are that they are the ones that should be that should be pitied, and that are the people that we should help out. And I find that to be rather interesting, especially when you hear how the way Scrooge talks in the beginning, and sort of puts the poor in that same category of, oh, they should, if they're a burden to society, then they shouldn't be a part of society, and oh, why should I give my money away to them, and he sort of sees the light in the end and realizes that it's not all like that, and you just can't, the way society is structured, there's not a whole lot of potential for the poor, at least for this time period. I think Western society has grown a lot since then, but obviously back then, you will see with the workhouses and the way that children were treated back then, it wasn't, it was not easy at all, and it was really difficult. So I like how the spirit of the present, or the ghost of the present, of Christmas present, sort of shows him that in the mid section of the short story. But again, it is kind of touching in on those socioeconomic issues of, where Scrooge is just kind of all about work, and at the same time he doesn't realize too that there needs to be some kind of joy and release and leisure for people in life, and that it really allows people to enjoy what they have and enjoy what they've been working for. And so you can take that from a fairly socioeconomic level. And I guess really that's the only other things that I could bring up. It just feels like that a lot of what Dickens used was inspiration from other kinds of works, but it does seem he did seem to create this kind of Christmas-like formula, and this formula was about sort of being and this kind of formula emphasizes the importance of humanity and the importance of effort. If you've watched the Nostalgia Critic's latest video where he reviewed one of the worst Christmas specials of all time, he talks about effort and how Christmas should be about effort and thinking about those that we care about, and trying to work towards something, and in doing so sort of giving back. And I think that's really what Scrooge ends up sort of doing at the end, and realizing what his sort of purpose is in life, especially since he is such an old man, and he doesn't get this intervention until like he's probably in his 60s. So that's kind of sad. It's kind of sad that Jake Marley didn't show up a little earlier to say, hey, let's kind of get your life together and stop being such a humbug or whatever. But despite that, it's still an interesting take as to what Christmas is, and it's just really about, it's just a holiday celebrating humanity. And this kind of a story, I think, really emphasizes the idea of humanity, and that it's about seeing people as people and realizing that not everything revolves around you, and you can't get everything what you want in life. But the important thing is that you share your life with those that surround you, and that you treat others with a sense of kindness and respect, and that you learn sort of from your mistakes. And yeah, I think really that's sort of the heart of the story, and the heart of the effort that Dickens had for writing this kind of a story. But I think that's really all I can say about this particular work. If there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But until next time, everybody,